Hello, viewers. I welcome you to the next episode of Just Because We Are Curious, JBC, our knowledge and experience sharing platform. Uh, I would once again want to thank you for the tremendous response that you have given to the past episodes of JBC, and I am sure you will find this episode equally interesting because what we are discussing today is of relevance, of course, and it is something that affects all of us. It affects us directly, it affects us indirectly, because what we're going to discuss today has a direct bearing on an organization's performance. Today, we have a very interesting guest with us, Mr. Alok Nigam, who's the Senior Vice President and Group CHRO for Bharti Agro. And why I say interesting is because he's one person who, in his own way, has played a very critical role in terms of defining culture for the various organizations that he has worked with. He has a very deep understanding of what makes culture take a certain form and shape. He understands beautifully in terms of how it plays out on the ground in an organization, and he beautifully understands in terms of how it ultimately impacts an organizational performance. He's one of the few individuals who can give us a very good understanding in terms of the cause and the effect. Cause being organizational culture and effect being organizational performance. So thank you, Alok. Thank you for taking time out. I'm very interested in hearing your views on organizational culture and how it impacts an organizational performance. I'm sure our viewers are going to find this conversation very interesting and impactful.
Yeah, thank you, Prashant. Thanks for giving this opportunity. Thanks, Right Management. And I've seen the previous episodes of JPC and very, very interesting and makes a lot of difference to the way people look at various aspects of management and organizations.
Wonderful. So let's begin our conversation, Alok. And the word culture invokes a lot of feelings in various individuals, and for some, it is all up in the air. It's very superficial. It's like air. It's there. You can feel it, but you can't see it. However, it has a very solid impact and effect on organizational performance. But the interesting thing is, people need to have a good understanding of what culture is and how do we put a certain operational definition to it. What I wanted to begin our conversation with is to understand your definition, your operational definition of what culture is. If you need to define culture to somebody, how would you define it? That's number one. Number two, how have you seen it play out in your various roles in different organizations? And how would you explain to somebody in terms of how culture impacts organizational performance? Intrinsically, we all understand, but if you want to establish a cause effect relationship in words, how would you do that?
Sure. To me, culture is something which is the soul of an organization. Culture is something is the purpose for which an organization exists. Culture is your story. Culture is the DNA of an organization. And if I were to put it, culture is like a bus, and people talk of a strategy. Strategy is like a bicycle. If a bicycle has to pull a bus, what will happen? In some time, there will be a collision. The bicycle will get crushed, and there will be some damage to the bus also. That's how the culture and strategy in an organization is. People talk of strategy, People talk of vision, but it is culture which is the underlying factor of defining whether an organization will become successful or not. There are many examples where successful enterprises have thrived because of the intrinsic culture of an organization and the very fact that the organizations have defined, either in writing or not. Organizations have defined their cultures, they have lived their cultures, they have lived the values, and that has made the organizations successful. To me, Prashant, I have always looked and I have always believed very passionately that the organizations, the organizations, uh, in organizations, there are two type of cultures which predominantly exist. One is the culture of performance, and another is the culture of belongingness. Both the cultures, in fact, both the factors of the culture cannot exist without each other. If you have only culture of performance and you don't have culture of belongingness, the organizations don't run in the long run because there is something called emotion. There are something called there is always a culture of belongingness where you talk of empathy, you talk of the people care, you talk of employee rewards, you talk of the emotions which go with an organization. So culture of belongingness is where I say that I belong to this place. I work for this place means I belong to this place. And it in isolation cannot exist if there is no culture of performance.
Yeah.
So culture of performance means what? Customer centricity, financial performance, the rigor, the work that goes into making an organization successful. So the organizations have to put a lot of emphasis on both the things, culture of performance and culture of belongingness. And then there is always an element of the within the culture of belongingness and culture of performance is about openness, is about transparency, is about honesty, is about truth. And one has to live these values. And if you don't live these values, you will be exposed. This will be a mask. So it's important that you define your values, you define your culture, and then run with it. As I gave the example of bus and a bicycle. The bicycle will get crushed if it were to pull a bus. Some damage will happen to bus, but it won't be that big a damage where it has to be rebuilt again. Some damage happens to culture. Since you've defined your culture, you can always rebuild on that. It's very difficult. If the strategy gets crushed and
Culture is
and culture is intact, you can at least have some solace that the you know uh, the, the, the culture will still play a very large role in redefining your strategies, in redefining your vision. That's how I look at culture.
very interesting analogy. Yeah.
So culture is a soul food. Culture is a DNA. Culture is why I work here. Do I belong to this place or not? And yeah, that's how I will define culture.
Wonderful. So let me sort of pick up your thoughts because again, this is a conversation that we, at times leaders need to understand and probably appreciate. What's your take in terms of being very proactive and in terms of taking control of the culture that you are trying to build within an organization, or rather letting it take its own shape by default? What's your take on these two in terms of let it take emerge and take its own shape, or rather being very proactive in terms of saying this is what we believe in, this is what the organization culture needs to be, if I may use the term,
Yeah.
and do things to give it that form and shape.
Very interesting. I believe that it's a leadership, the top management, the top leadership of the company, which has to actually define the culture. The direction has to be set. The behaviors, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, has to be defined. I still sometimes think and feel that those big statements posted on the walls, uh, and people say we have made our vision, we have defined our values, and that defines our culture, will go for a toss if we don't live that, if we don't walk the talk. Those will remain, on the boards if we don't practice that. So and I've seen in many organizations where people allow culture to emerge on its own. I think I would call it a cultural drift. Yeah, where you do something, you start doing something, and then think that something magically will happen, and culture will define by itself. I think is a mandate for, I would say, mediocrity, disaster. Inspirational leadership from the organization is of paramount importance to define the culture and set the context how an organization is. You see examples, many examples of enterprises worldwide where the culture was defined in the organization by promoters, by senior management, and the organizations have actually walked the talk. And wherever the culture was not defined, the context was not set, organizations have flunkered. Let me give an example to you.
Yes, I think that will make it interesting.
I know of an organization which was into manufacturing synthetic rayons, part of a very, very large industrial group. It was very successful in those times where there was licensee Raj. The but the culture of creativity and innovation in that organization was not something which was uh, not in practice. So whatever else was happening in the rest of the world in terms of manufacturing synthetic rayon, that innovation, that creativity, that automation, let's say, yeah, it never entered into that organization. A very successful, hugely successful organization. It was number one organization in Sweden in this country. The organization doesn't exist because, for the simple reason that the organization had shut its door on seeing what is happening in the rest of the world. So how do we bring that into this organization? Thousands of people became jobless in that organization, and it doesn't exist. Nobody even knows the name of the organization. Yeah. I have worked in some of the organizations where I've seen how. So, for example, one of the organization, the culture was of doing experiments and never bother about whether this experiment will fail. A hugely successful organization. We were allowed to do experiments, make mistakes, learn from it, and move forward. And the entire organization, and this actually came from the board, this came from the promoters, right? And the mandate was very, very clear. It was a culture. So it was mandated that guys, don't bother if you don't succeed at attempt number one. There's always an attempt number two. There's always a plan B, plan C, right? And the organization was hugely successful. There's another organization where I was working, where the emphasis was on, the culture was people first, customer always.
People first, customer always.
Customer always.
Okay.
Right. And which means what? I believe in my people that they will do right things, and therefore, customer will always be with you. Because you will always take care of customer. So focus on people, focus on customer. Like I said earlier, culture of performance, which is customer centricity, culture of belonging, which is people. The organization also said, guys, we believe that one has to tie the laces of your shoes while sprinting. So that was a culture of speed. Hugely successful organization. Number one organization in its space in the country. In my current organization, Bhartiya Group, we have always believed that the culture of customer centricity is of paramount importance. We are so accessible to our customers that right from the chairman of the board to everyone in the senior leadership team down the line, we are always accessible. We always want to listen to what our customers are saying. Institutional customers, as you know, we supply to large brands all over the world, and retail customers in our other business. Right? So the focus and the mandate has been that take care of customers first. If you take care of customers first, they will always take care of you. And to reach to that level, we have we have, we have a culture of openness and transparency. Anything and everything that we do in this organization is known to everyone. We are very transparent and we are very accessible to even our own.
So there's a common thread that I see in all the stories that you shared, Alok, and both successful and not so successful of some past and current organization. Is the role that the topmost senior leadership played in terms of not only defining but living those those tenets, so to say. How do you get the next in line leaders to understand and get them to, so one, of course, they are seeing the senior most leaders live those cultures, so obviously there's a message there's a inconsequentiality to that, but how intolerable you need to be with the larger organization, if I may use the term intolerable, when it comes to living those tenets of the culture. Can you share some examples where could be in your past organization or whatever, where you as the senior leader put the foot down that this is not acceptable and come what may, even if we need to take certain hard calls, we will. Is there certain stories that you could, or some examples that you could share with us?
Sure, yeah, that's very important.
Yes.
That's very important because if you have to live those values and if you have to live those those cultural elements, you have to put your foot down because the story spreads faster and people come to know it. And then all becomes fake, all becomes a mask. So one of the very important element of how do you influence and how do you make sure that everybody in the organization lives that culture and lives those values is by defining what kind of behaviors are acceptable in the organization, what kind of behaviors are not acceptable in the organization. There have been many instances in my career, Prashant, where the behaviors which have not been acceptable, we have defined them as the positive attributes of a behavior and the negative attribute of a behavior. There's a consequence married to that. And many times when people have not lived once, twice, repeated, we have to put our foot down. Guys, this is not on, this is not what defines my organization, not what defines this organization. So punitive actions have to be taken sometimes. The communication. Prashant, very important part is, and I think this earlier is communication.
Yeah.
How do you communicate your culture? Right? You have to constantly be in touch with your people, with with your stakeholders, with your employees, with people outside, including your customers. We have to communicate the right things in the right manner. So, in terms of consequence management, also, if you have to communicate, re-communicate, reinforce, one has to do that. And I will give a example without naming.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Uh, you know, we said that the customer centricity and customer first or customer always is the motto by which we live. Right? And we found in one particular case where the customer was being kept in dark. So, for example, if certain goods have to be produced and shipped at the right time in one of our previous organizations, customer was kept in dark. This is happening. This is not happening. This is going on. This will. So customer was not informed. Customer was being kept in dark. Right? And we found that this has happened in the past also, and because maybe that is the reason we have not got repeat orders from this particular customer. We have to take an action for a group of employees in that particular business or in that particular division. So there have been many instances, Prashant, where if your behavior is contrary to what organization believes in, you have to put your foot down. Wonderful.
So, culture usually is associated with displayed behavior. That's how it plays out, which are more softer elements. I want to pick your thoughts on some of the more harder, concrete stuff in terms of org structure, systems, policies, which can play a role and be a facilitator in terms of an organization and its employees living its culture, playing out that culture in terms of displayed behavior. How does that work? So it's a combination of behaviors being identified, defined, communicated, watched out for, awarded, reprimanded. But to facilitate that, there's a role of the harder part, the org structure, systems, processes. How does that come together, and how does the absence of one impact the other, and ultimately the organization culture, so to say? So
Yeah, I get your point.
yes,
Yes, there has to be a backbone of doing, first of all, meaning what you want to do and doing what you want to do. And the best way of doing it is through setting the processes, setting the what we call as SOPs in the organization, which will not happen unless you have defined your structure.
yeah,
So structure plays a very a pivotal role, very important role in whatever you do, whether culture, whether anything else,
yeah,
structure. But I always believe that while structures are necessary, what today stops an organization or people from doing certain things is hierarchies.
yeah, yeah,
It's important to follow a structure. Without a structure, anywhere, society, organization, governments, without a structure you can't function. The problem comes when there is a hierarchy attached to it.
yeah.
And when I say hierarchy, red tapeism, bureaucracy sometimes creeps into that. So I will, people these days talk about whether today's organizations are become boundaryless. Is there a need for hierarchy? Why is it happening? It's happening because of the advent of media, social media. Today, if I want to follow Narendra Modi, if I want to follow, let's say, the founder of Microsoft, right? I can go on the media, follow him on Twitter, follow him on any other social media, and respond and comment. Right. So today, because of the electronic media, people are accessible. And it is more likely that when you make a comment on certain statement of an individual, you get noticed. So especially the younger generation, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, right? They feel that the boundaries between them and me has come down. So hierarchies have been broken. But it doesn't mean that the structures have been broken. The
It
structures
doesn't mean that they've lost its relevance.
they've lost its relevance, absolutely. Yeah. So to coming back to this point, it's important to have a structure, follow that structure without getting into the hierarchies, follow the processes, and of course, you know, the as I said earlier, the consequences of not following the process, not following the structure attached to it. It is of paramount importance.
Wonderful. So, Alok, as part of the consulting work we do, so many times we come across this interesting conversation with organizations where they come and say, we want to change our organizational culture. And I'm sure you empathize with that situation because probably you would have been put in that situation a few times by your leadership in terms of giving you the task of changing an organizational culture. So, so your take on this in terms of how easy, difficult, possible, not possible, if possible, how do you make it happen on the ground? An entire organization is working in a certain way. It's a huge system, multiple people, different beliefs, a certain underlying belief system which is making them operate and show up at work in a certain way day to day. It's almost probably a part of the subconscious now without them realizing. And now suddenly you say there's a
Change of
new way of working and we need everybody to flower into something completely different. How does one go about making this happen?
Yeah, quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many times people say something needs to be done about the culture of the organization. In a lot of companies where I have worked, we have talked about it. We have probably made an attempt also. But what I feel is that can you change DNA of a person? Can you change soul of a body? Not easy.
Not easy.
Not easy. If somebody says impossible, then also I think no, it's not impossible. But you have to do a complete metamorphosis of yourself. And when somebody says I have to change the culture of the organization, I simply ask, change begins with you.
Yes.
Are you willing to change? Whether you are the managing director of the company, you are the CEO of the company.
Famously Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change that you want to see in the world."
Absolutely. So, who has defined the culture? Only you have defined the culture. It is not about just the organization, but even families and societies and communities.
It's a collective behavior.
It's a collective behavior. So if you are willing to change, and I want to see that change in myself, change can happen. Surely it can happen. Now, for example, the organizations which get taken over, acquisition happens, the ownership changes, and a new kind of culture comes in the organization. And that's the right time to relook at the culture. And there are many, many examples where a new wave of thinking, fresh wave of thinking has come. When a generation changes in the organization, so the son takes over from the father, let's say, or the next generation comes, he starts thinking differently, the change happens.
Yeah.
But As I say, that uh, the, the most important thing is that am I am I going to be the first example of driving the change? And then, yeah, processes will change. Your set of behaviors will change. It will become better. But that apex body of an organization, the promoters of any organization, chief executives of the organization, if they really mean to change, first of all, one also has to examine why the change is needed.
Why the change is needed? Yes.
What has gone wrong?
Yes.
Have I done some kind of, um, you know, some kind of study? Have I done some kind of self-evaluation that this is something which has not gone well with the organization, and why it has not gone well with the
And going back to your early analogy of the cycle, and the
cycle
bus,
and bus?
how the bus holding the cycle from going forward.
So once somebody is willing to put his time, effort, money, energy into analyzing, introspecting, yes, it can. It can.
But the change will need to start.
Change will need to start from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not something that can happen overnight.
It cannot happen overnight.
People will need to be patient. It has to be a combination of the soft, the hard, everything comes together. And then probably the incremental change will be seen. Wow, great. So, Alok, I know you work, this organization is a very silent organization, if I may use the word, but it's doing some wonderful work
Absolutely.
in the business that it's in, uh, and your business model, because of the business model that you are in, you are fairly distributed in terms of at one end, your entire client base, at least on the fashion side of the business, is all sitting in the European continent and in Americas. And then at the other end, your manufacturing is happening probably somewhere deep down in various states of India. And this gives you that huge canvas of customers being of a certain profile, certain type, and your at the other end your workers coming in from a certain profile, certain type. And while it's interesting, I'm sure it has its own challenge in terms of making everybody live a certain common
Yeah.
set of behaviors, beliefs, live that belief in that. How does one go about managing this distributed large organization, you know, different levels of maturity at every stage of at every part of the organization? How does one get everybody to appreciate, align to a common line of thought, a belief system, and then live it on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, yeah, it's not easy. Prashant, it's not easy. We're into so many businesses, development business, asset and property management business, construction business, manufacturing, exports, so many places in India, outside India, right? So it's not easy, but how we live it is that we, senior management, we speak the same language. Wherever we go, whenever we interact with our people, we speak the same language. We speak the language of openness, honesty, truth, and transparency, which is evident from our actions also. Right from the chairman of the company, who is a founder promoter, to everybody in the top management, senior management, we speak the same language. And we display the same behavior. So our behavior, for example, we are in a corporate office, let's say. If I go to one of my factories in Chennai, if I go to, let's say, office in Hangzhou, if we have said that we promote the behavior of openness and transparency, nobody will find us lacking in that. We will display the same behavior. If the driver of a factory in Chennai wants to come and speak to me, and if a peon in Hangzhou wants to come and speak to me, I am available. And I will explain to him, I will tell what's right and what's happening. I think in every organization, it's the communication which is the backbone of letting your people know what organization believes in. And that's why I say that organization says this is my vision. Is it a shared vision or not? Do people know about that or not? How will that happen?
Do you emotionally connect with it?
Absolutely. You can. And this will happen only by communication, communicating with them all the time through open houses, through in-house magazines, small group activities, small group talks. Uh, that's how we have been able to do in this organization. That we are very consistent in what we say and what we do.
I think this is very important. Consistency in terms of, so there's a,
Yes.
it cannot be a sporadic flavor of the month type of a
Yeah,
thought.
yeah. And we reward those behaviors. Yeah. We definitely reward those behaviors. So that's very important that you communicate, and allow people to ask questions, allow people to come to you, and solve their problems. This is how we have believed in this organization. And that's how we have been able to live despite the fact that we have so much of length and breadth across the country, outside the country.
Wonderful. So this sort of brings me to the final part of our communication, Alu, and I just want to pick your thoughts in terms of some story, some incident, some event that is top of the mind around culture. Could be a challenging, could be a heartwarming story, could be a challenging story, something that comes top of the mind that you really uh, think of as wow, this is the moment where we truly lived our culture. So if you could share some such instance, I'm sure our listeners would love it. So any top of the mind recall could be in the recent past, could be sometime, could be from the present organization, could be from your past organizations. Happy to hear that.
Prashant, as you were asking this, while you were asking this, I very vividly recollect about a few years back in one of my previous organizations, where humility was one of the values, and therefore we used to live that culture. So what happened? One day I was in the corporate office of that company, and I was standing there and talking to somebody, one of my colleagues. Large office, large corporate office. Suddenly I saw the, the the gates of the lift open, and the chairman of the company, along with the one of the directors of the company, came out with somebody from Europe who came to this. So they were also in the center of that hall, the reception or lobby, and they were talking to each other. Chairman and the other senior director of the company probably had come down from one of the floors above to see him.
See you. Yeah.
I was standing there talking to one of my colleagues. Very open organization, very open culture. I will explain to you the culture of humility. I saw the watchman, the security guard of that office, walking towards the gate, and suddenly his handkerchief, his hanky, fell down from his pocket. Chairman noticed it and chairman saw it and then walked 5 steps. Pick that hanky, call that security guard and hand it over. I was touched. The chairman of the company, and very large one of the most celebrated personalities in the country, almost $14 billion organization. Right? The chairman of that company displaying, not for sake of displaying to others, not for others to notice that, because there are only 5, 6 people standing in the lobby. Right? Picking up the hanky and giving it to back, hey, this fell out of your pocket. It touched my hand. That here the chairman talks of the culture of humility and he displays it. Then and there. So yeah, that is what comes to my mind immediately.
Yeah, and probably the good part of that probably the chairman would not have even, I mean, it would just have been a very matter of fact,
Yeah. Yeah.
Something, you would not have probably thought anything about it.
Absolutely. It was very, very spontaneous.
It was very spontaneous, and that's where it becomes, it's a part of the DNA. Wonderful. That's a great story to end our conversation on, Alok. I thank you so much for taking time out, and I'm sure this could go on and on.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But time is, of course, of an essence. So thank you so much for taking time out. This has been extremely insightful, let me tell you. And I'm sure our viewers would also have some very good takeaways from our conversation. Thank you once again, Alok, for taking time out.
Thank you
for being
Thank
on
you
this
so
platform.
much.
Pleasure.